Thank you, Mary. Well, it's good to see all of your faces. I don't know about anybody else, but I miss people. I miss being with people, and I miss socializing, and I miss being with you in person, and I miss the drive up the canyon. And hopefully sometime in the future, we can resume that, being together in person. Our opening words today come to us from Mary Austin. I arise facing east. I am asking toward the light. I am asking that my day shall be beautiful with light. I am asking that the place where my feet are shall be light, that as far as I can see, I shall follow it aright. I am asking for courage to go forward through the shadow. I am asking toward the light. And now if you'll take up your chalice or candle, grab some fire. Let's light our chalices and repeat these words together. We light our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. And in the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. So as many people have pointed out, we're all under a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety about just the world in general. You know, besides the COVID, besides the virus, our economics are up in the air, our politics are up in the air. There are people deliberately exacerbating these situations for their own personal gain. And so our uncertainty is very, very high. And that's stressful because we can't fight it. I mean, there's nothing to wrestle there. We can't flee from it because it's everywhere. And so we're kind of stuck. And so a lot of that energy comes into our bodies. And so this morning, for our meditation, I'd like to start with just some deep breathing. So wherever you are, just get comfortable and relax. And just breathe in and breathe out. Just pay attention to your breathing. Useful because if you do that for 5-10 minutes at a time, a few times a day, it'll lower your heart rate and your blood pressure and have all kinds of good things going on for your body. But now I'd like you to stand up wherever you are and shake this energy out. Let's just shake it out. I'd stand up, except I'm kind of trapped between my screen and the monitor. But just shake it out. Shake your legs, shake your arms, shake all that stuff out. Move your body, release that energy out through your hands and your feet and your legs. And just keep doing that. Because it's important we don't let that get stuck in our bodies. I used to be a body worker, still am partly. And it was amazing how much people locked into their bodies, into their muscles, into their breathing, into the way they stood. And we can do something about that. It's really important right now to do things that we can control. And we can't control what's going on outside of us, but we can control how we respond to it. So over the next few weeks or months, remember to breathe and shake and dance. Thanks.
Thank you, Munro, for your guidance as we look at the West. I think we are okay now. This is the time in the service in which we share our resources in ways that enable this congregation to continue to provide these services, but also continue to do the special outreach that Betty discussed earlier, but also our ongoing support for organizations such as Taos Immigrant Allies or the St. James Food Pantry. These speak to our deep values and our ability to think of others and give of our resources to others. We have done well with continuing the pledges made by individuals in the congregation. I hope you continue to mail in your pledge, however your chosen schedule means, monthly or every 6 months. You can mail your checks to UCOT at P.O. Box 510, Taos 87571. And as you do that, think about how absolutely critical in these times our resources are for many. I now want to give a shout out and an appreciation to Sally Savage and Martha Grossman for identifying and bringing to us today a wonderful piece of music entitled Voices for Women. It was written by Pauline Russell Brown and published in 1913. First sung at the Indiana State Convention of Women's Franchise League. You know where this is going. Brown was from Indianapolis and published a whole volume of special songs written about women's right to vote. And this Tuesday, the 18th of August, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of Congress passing the 19th Amendment to our Constitution, which provided at last the appropriate right for women to be voting. I have a 1-year-old in my house who will turn 2 on Tuesday, and I'm delighted that I can tell her this story in the future and how every birthday she can glory in the fact that those women persisted and made it possible for us to have the vote. So Sally and Martha, thank you, and we'll turn it to Martha now to hear this music. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Martha. Our closing words today come to us from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Hitch your wagon to a star. Let us not bog down in paltry works which serve our pot and bag alone. Let us not lie and steal. No God will help. We shall find all their teams going the other way. The Great Bear, Orion, Leo, Hercules. Every God will leave us. Work rather for those interests which the divinities honor and promote. Justice, love, freedom, knowledge, utility. May it be so. And if you'll join me in the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Martha, over to you. Thank you again, Martha. Our hands remember what it's like to hold hands. There's a memory in our muscles, in our skin, in our flesh that remembers what it's like to hold hands. So I'm inviting you, before we do our benediction here, to just hold your hands out and feel those other hands holding yours. And that's just as real as if it was a real hand. So as we hold hands in this virtual space, feeling each other's presence, feeling each other's beings, join me in the words of our benediction. May love and skill guide our hands. May love and courage fill our hearts.
May love and courage fill our hearts.
May love and wisdom light our minds.
May love and wisdom light our minds.
May love flow through us and walk among us.
May love flow through us and walk among us.
As we live our lives.
As we live our lives.
And walk through the shadow together.
And walk through the shadow together.
To heal our world.
To heal our world.
And come out on the other side.
And come out on the other side.
May it be so.
May it be so.
Go in peace. Shalom, amen, amen, and blessed be. Thank you.
Thank you, Munro.
So I invite you to sit down again, relax, or stay standing, whatever works. And I will get on with my talk. So here we are, living in the new normal. Not that we had a choice, but that's kind of the way it is with normal. I look back, almost 20 years ago to when I got my first cell phone. It was one of those little flip phones with a tiny black and white screen, and it had a tiny 10-key pad for dialing and typing out messages very laboriously. And I think my plan might have had 60 voice minutes and 10 texts a month or something. And at the time, it was a big deal. And it only worked in town. You got outside the city limits and forget about it. And now, I carry a smartphone that has more memory and processing power than the desktop computer I owned at the time. I'm connected to search and maps and weather and email almost anywhere I go. I can communicate with people all over the planet, and I can look things up in a matter of seconds. I have a high-resolution camera and a voice recorder in my pocket. I can stream video calls and cat videos, if I wanted to my heart's content. But no one ever asked me if I wanted any of that. And quite honestly, had the technology stopped advancing in, 2002 when I got that first flip phone, I probably wouldn't have noticed or cared. That phone did what I needed it to do. And for the rest, I had maps and cameras, and the email could wait until I got home. And checking the weather once a day was plenty, and I could tell if it was going to rain by looking up at the sky and not down at a screen. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a Luddite. Some of what my smartphone can do is very useful. Some of it is just distraction, and some of it is probably dangerous. But smartphones are the new normal for most of us, and they made their way incrementally into our lives over a couple of decades without us really noticing. I suppose you could say that normal is that which we take for granted, that which we do not notice until it changes suddenly. Now, I take it for granted that I have clean water and electric power. I take it for granted that my local stores have decent food and affordable goods in them. I take it for granted that I can access medical care. I take it for granted that I can walk the streets without having to worry about being arrested just for being there. But what's normal for me probably isn't normal for thee. Other folks take it for granted that they'll be harassed by police when they go out and may not make it home from the grocery store. They take it for granted that clean water isn't coming out of their taps anytime soon. They take it for granted that all the things I take for granted aren't accessible to them, like decent medical care and work that pays a decent wage. The new normal isn't all that new for a lot of us. Yeah, a couple of things have changed. Most of us wear masks. We distance ourselves from each other in public. Some of us are lucky enough to be able to work from home. But that's an impossibility for many. They have to work or go homeless and hungry. They don't have the luxury to stay home and stay safe, and they never did. And people of color and the poor still have bad medical care if they have it at all. So much for the new normal. Normal. The earliest English use of the word meant perpendicular, forming a right angle, like something made to a carpenter's square, which was called a norma in Latin. And then the Latin word normalis also came to mean according to a rule, from which modern English meanings of the word come. So in the 1800s, as people began to quantitatively study things like height and weight and blood pressure, typical values came to be referred to as normal. And by extension, values regarded as healthy or desirable came to be called normal, regardless of how common they were. We all have assumptions and cultural conditioning about what's normal. What is normal is usually unexamined. And there's a sense in which normal is what happens when we aren't paying attention, like going from flip phones to smartphones, like having an exploitive globalism imposed on the world so we can have those smartphones at the cost of other lives and ecologies, neither of which we asked for. Do we really want things to go back to normal? Normal is not working for most people here in America and around the world, so why go back to it? Or rather, why continue it? There's a sense in which we should probably do away with the idea of normal altogether in most situations. So when all those 19th century scientists and mathematicians began to gather data and apply statistics to human, they came up with all these lovely bell curves for height and weight and blood pressure and the like. And some believed that the peak of the bell curve, the center of the distribution, represented the ideal human that nature sought to realize. And while such a person might not actually exist, the curve was seen as the true standard by which deviations were defined. To quote our house university professor Jonathan Scholl, the individual was synonymous with error, while the average person represented the true human being. So much for our uniqueness. Now, the word normal has many uses. It can mean frequent or average in the population, as represented in one of those typical bell curves. It can also mean adequate, as in free from deficiency or defect, or optimal in the sense of being physically fit or mentally sharp. It can mean what is usually done, what's typical in a society or a group or a culture. It can define an ideal, the perfect tomato, or Nietzsche's Übermensch. And all of these meanings tend to elide, to blur into each other, from the scientific to the traditional to what is expected and what is seen as correct behavior. Normal is something of a phantom, a ghost, a useful abstraction at times. But when we privilege the idea of normal and define something as being abnormal, particularly in culture, in society, we pathologize it and see it as deviant or deficient, when in fact it may be true and real and necessary for survival, or simply unique and valuable in and of itself. And this applies not to individuals, but to communities as well, because there's no such thing as a normal community. Each one is a unique expression of people and place, biology and history, conflict and resolution, and the intervention of random events. Each one is precious and vital. The virus has disrupted our normal, and this gives us the opportunity to pay attention to all those things we haven't paid attention to. All the things we've taken for granted, because all those things are in flux. And they're in flux in a way we haven't seen in generations. Even before COVID, our institutions and customs were no longer serving us like they used to. Our social contract, such as it is unraveling, seems to be unraveling. And things hiding under the thin veil of normalcy, like racism and inequality, are now more visible than ever. The bigger picture is that our culture and economy and organizing principles are undergoing what's called a chaotic transition. That which we've ignored or repressed is erupting back into our consciousness and will ultimately need to be reintegrated into our psyches and our culture. And there will be a new normal, but this isn't it yet. The old normal has to disintegrate first. This is, without a doubt, a painful and uncomfortable process. But it's also a necessary and positive step if progress is to be made. It's one that cannot be avoided. Let me briefly describe the medicine wheel teaching as I learned it from my elders, both white and red. It's going to be a pretty basic explanation of something that's fairly complex in practice. But basically, as we know, there are the four directions: east, south, west, north. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, those correspond to the four seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter. And those correspond to the human life cycle. There's birth, death, rebirth in the east, childhood in the south, adolescence in the west, and adulthood in the north. And overlaid on that are the four aspects of a human being: the body, the soul, the mind, and the spirit. And in this model, human psychology and culture map onto those four directions of space and time. From a life cycle perspective, we are born from the east. Our childhood is in the south, and then we move into the west for our adolescence. And if we successfully pass through the west, and some don't, We arrive in the north, the place of adulthood and community. And then time takes us through elderhood and back into the east, returning to spirit. And time will take us on this journey. We have no choice in the matter. The wheel turns for all of us, and we pass through these cycles in similar ways at different times in our lives. Here's the thing. There are no shortcuts. You can't jump from childhood to adulthood. You have to go through the West, the place where the sun sets, the place of darkness and examining the soul, the underworld. You have to deal with your mortality, your shadows, your grief, your self-work, your reasons for being, and make a place for them so that you can become an adult, caring for self and community, and working with others so that the people may live. This is the process of initiation, of disintegration and being put back together again in a new way. And you can't avoid it, and if you try, you'll end up right back in the underworld. We're poised on the threshold of the underworld as a culture. And we can make that descent with intention and purpose, or we can just go on for the ride, so to speak. I don't recommend the latter. To do it with purpose means dealing with the shadows of our cultural collective. We all know what they are. The violent history, the racism, the inequality, sexism, classism, exploitation. The list goes on. And it means coming to terms with our grief and our loss and our failures. It means making amends for past wrongs. It means rediscovering our purpose and our reasons for being on this earth. Maybe, just maybe, on the other side of that is wholeness and community, a real new normal that's worth living in for all of us. But first, we have to journey through the West. May it be so. May we do it with grace. Thank you.